It's supposed to be showing me presenter view, and it is not showing me presenter view. So we are we're gonna wing it. That's right.
Baby.
I will say when I wung it last night, it was an hour and 20 minutes. So I am not winging it all the way, but we will attempt. So I am very, very grateful to be here tonight, and we're going to go ahead and start. I was doing an intro, but I'm not. You know who I am. All right. So I want to start our discussion this evening, which is on disability, and I'll be talking about 4 biblical characters and the disabilities that they dealt with. But I want to start here, which is an extra biblical story. This is Jordan Walker Ross, as the slide says, and he is an actor that plays little James, somebody that we know of in our Bible as James the Lesser or James the Younger, and he's on a show called The Chosen. Has anybody seen The Chosen?
Yes.
Okay. So Robin and I really like this show, and this is part of the reason why. Jordan lives with not only 1 but 2 disabilities, which make it very difficult for him to walk. He has severe scoliosis, and he also has a mild form of cerebral palsy. So he walks with a cane, and he's been on other things before, but he's kind of been a bit character behind the scenes. So he tried out for the show not really thinking that he would get it because of the disabilities, and he was really surprised when they called him back and said, we want you for the part. Unfortunately, he walks with a cane, but sometimes people see that and think that's a temporary thing or whatever, so he felt like he needed to confess. So I got in touch with him, and he said, this is not going away, and I know this role makes it necessary for me to do a lot of walking. And he said, I'd understand if you want me to bow out. And instead of doing that, the producer actually said, what if we write the disability into your role? Which was, very unexpected for him. But he said, that'd be fabulous. I'd love to do the show. So again, he plays one of the disciples, and so you can see him on the scenes kind of lagging behind the others. One of the other disciples will walk with him, but he's always kind of at the back. So they got to the 3rd season of this show, and they've been traveling all around, and he's watching Jesus heal all of these other individuals that they encounter. And so he kind of gets a little bit discouraged that Jesus hasn't come to him and asked about healing. So he goes to Jesus privately, and he asks the question about why haven't you offered me any healing? And Jesus at first says, well, I please just be patient, which, me living with a disability, that's not a pastoral answer. And it's not going to make me happy, especially if I'm sitting with somebody that I know can provide me with some relief. But then he continues, so Jesus continues and says, you don't really understand what a gift you are to the disciples and to the people that we encounter, because most everybody else is coming to believe in me because they've gotten a miracle. But you haven't gotten one, and you're continuing to follow. And that's a testimony to me. And I remember, and I'm doing it right now, I remember when we first watched that scene, I got a little teary. And then I thought, that's a beautiful moment, but it's too bad it's a fiction. Because when we talk about the disabled in the Bible, what we think of are these unnamed individuals that either come to Jesus or he encounters them along the way, and, they have an issue. They're blind, or they're lame, or they've got, what's the dropsy? I don't know what dropsy is, but it's in the Bible. So it's there's a particular situation that they're dealing with, and they come to Jesus, and he heals them, and they go away. That's the extent of the narrative we have with them. There's nothing before or after. We don't know anything else. What strikes me, and what did strike me when I was looking up images of Moses, is this is kind of what you find, right? You find this person that looks really, really confident, even though he's an older gentleman. He seems like he's committed to doing whatever it is that God has asked of him. But if you go back and you look in your Bible, starting at Exodus 3, that is not what's true of Moses. So at the burning bush, God gets Moses' attention, and God says, I have heard and paid attention to the cries of my people, the Israelites. They are calling out for freedom, and I'm sending you to go and petition Pharaoh to let them go. And Moses kind of hems and haws around the whole thing and says, wait, let's figure out some of the details of this. Like, how are they going to know that you're the one that sent me? And why would they believe me in the first place anyway? So they do this back and forth, and finally you get to the point where Moses kind of divulges that he's got this disability. He says, I am slow or heavy of mouth and heavy of tongue. I don't speak well. You can't send me. And God says, well, wait a second. Who do you think created you, right? Who gives speech to mortals? And Moses says, well, maybe we can do it, but I still don't speak well. Well, what you need to know is this Midrash Agadah. There is a story in their rabbinical commentary that kind of lets us know that the speech impediment is sort of God's doing, according to the story. So the story goes that when Moses was growing up in Pharaoh's temple, a very inquisitive child used to reach for Pharaoh's gold crown. And Pharaoh got kind of suspicious about it and concerned and thought, this person might become an issue for me at some point. And I need to test out and see if this is something that I really need to be worried about. And so he set up a test, and he had 2 trays of things set in front of Moses within his reach. And one was the gold crown, and one was a live coal. And he set them there and let Moses choose. And of course, being the child and being attracted to the gold, he started to reach for the crown. And the story says that God sent an angel to divert his hand over to the coal, which of course, when he picked up, burned his fingers. He dropped the coal and put the fingers in his mouth, and it burned his tongue. So this is the source, supposedly the source of the speech impediment. And so now, with Moses standing in front of God and saying, I don't speak well there might be a reason for that. But anyway, so they finally come to this understanding, and Moses says, okay, I'll go, but I'm telling you I don't speak well. I really don't want to. And God says, well, okay, I'm going with you. I'll be your voice, but I'll also send your brother Aaron. He speaks well. I will give my words to you. You pass them on to him. So it's a chain reaction. And then Aaron will speak. But what I think is really, really important to notice, if you go back and look at the whole of the story, is that when we start, it is Aaron all the time who speaks, either to the Pharaoh or to the Israelite people. But as you move through the story, you see it kind of shifting, and it starts going back and forth between Aaron and Moses. and finally it is just Moses. And I don't think it's that anything changed with his ability to speak. I think what happened is he finally started to realize that the voice that God gave him was enough. And so he kind of came into his own on that. And I will say I tried to count, but I don't think I got an accurate number, but I do think that it's somewhere near 70 times that God actually asks Moses to speak to somebody. So not only does God call him despite his disability, but he calls him to use the very thing that Moses thinks is his weakness. We'll move on to Jacob. Jacob is kind of, in my mind, is a little bit opposite of Moses. You have him kind of in the beginning of his life, he seems very, very confident, and he's almost certain that he's always going to get what he wants. And you see, he does get what he wants for quite a while. I want to read a short piece by Frederick Buechner from his Peculiar Treasures. He has a section here, description of Jacob. And Buechner writes, "The book of Genesis makes no attempt to conceal the fact that Jacob was, among other things, a crook. What's more, you get the feeling that whoever wrote up his seamy adventures got a real kick out of them. Twice, he cheated his lame-brained brother Esau out of what was coming to him. At least once he took advantage of his old father Isaac's blindness and played him for a sucker. He outdid his double-crossing father-in-law Laban by conning him out of most of his livestock, and later on, when Laban was looking the other way, by sneaking off with not only both of his daughters, but just about everything else that wasn't nailed down, including his household gods. Jacob was never satisfied. He wanted the moon, and if he'd ever managed to bilk heaven out of that, he would have been back the next morning for the stars to go along with it." So this is Jacob, right? This is, if I had asked you all what you know about Jacob, this would have been some of the things that you had lifted up. So it takes a very striking event to get his behavior to shift. And that's what I want us to look at. So this is a pencil drawing by a friend and clergy colleague of mine that I met at seminary. And I like this image. It's almost really hard to tell that it's the depiction of the wrestling, because these two beings are so intertwined that you can't really tell where one ends and the other begins, except if you look on the left, you can see kind of a leg kicked out to the side under my friend's initials. So Genesis 32 tells us that these two entities, however you want to name them, man or angel that comes after Jacob, these two wrestled for the entirety of a night. And when the morning light was starting to break, the man that attacked kind of demands to be let go, and of course Jacob won't let him go. And the man, the angel, kind of decides that Jacob is not going to quit, right? And he may not lose either. And so the angel decides he's just got to play dirty. So nobody really knows exactly what he did, but it's said that he kind of touched the socket of his hip or his thigh, or he aggravated the sciatic nerve. Whatever he did, he caused Jacob a lot of pain, and he made it very difficult for him to walk. right? So what we're told at the end of this is that Jacob leaves the scene limping. And what most commentators and scholars will say is not that it's the limp that changed his identity or his behavior, it's the giving of the new name. But I want to advocate for it actually being the limp, because the limp is what endures. If you watch throughout the Bible, the limp is what keeps getting mentioned. So what causes the change? So again, commentators will tell you it's the name change. If you keep following the Genesis narrative after this event, you will see they keep calling him Jacob. It's Jacob, Jacob, Jacob. Every once in a while you'll see Israel and you might forget his name changed. And, who is that? Oh, wait, that's Jacob. But the limp, they tell us right immediately, he's limping. And then it says later on, to this day, the Israelites will not eat the sinew of that portion of the thigh or whatever, because it's where Jacob got injured. And also, if you go to Hebrews 11, where it's got the great listing of all of these paragons of faith, Jacob is in there. And what it says about Jacob is, when he was dying, he blessed his sons, leaning over his staff. So the limp is still there. And it's my contention that that is what changes him. And you can see it as he leaves this scene, that scene of being in this wrestling match. He meets up with Esau, and instead of trying to con him or scheme him or anything else, he bows down to the ground 7 times at Esau's feet. He calls him my Lord. He is humble before him. He offers him extravagant gifts, and they part on good terms. So it's my contention. He doesn't mention, he's got this brand new name. He's just won, even though he's got a limp. He got a brand new identity out of this wrestling match, and instead of lording that over Esau, he doesn't mention it. And that's not the Jacob that we see before that event. I will say there are events like this that change people, and it's not just people who live with disabilities. There are significant times that something happens and it gives us a new understanding of who we are, who we're meant to be, and we have the ability then to kind of shed extraneous things. And I really do think that this is what happened for Jacob. I will say this evening I am carrying with me something that reminds me of a time that I really felt like I didn't know who I was, and this resided on 2 desks in Shenandoah Valley, and then again in West Virginia, and right now it resides in a bathroom drawer. And that seems like a weird place, but I see it almost every morning when I get ready. And it's a cradle rock that came at a very, very good time for me. And so that is something that kind of keeps me centered to feeling like I have something to offer. Let's move on to New Testament and Paul. Paul's going to be more difficult for me because I don't have my Bible in front of me to read some scripture passages, and I wouldn't know where they are. You're going to hand me a Bible, and I wouldn't know exactly where they are. So, all right. So I will do my best with this. I will say there's no hidden image in this. This is Paul, right? If I look this up, if I say give me a picture of Paul, it's going to look like this. It's like everybody got together at one table and they said, "What do you think Paul looks like?" And everybody went, "That guy." I think that's who Paul looks like. So let's just move on and talk about Paul's disability. So Paul actually has two disabilities. The first one is the temporary one that everybody can tell me. It's the road to Damascus, thank you. Road to Damascus. It's the blinding light coming, and it takes his eyesight for 3 days until God sends Ananias to go and heal him. That's temporary, but Paul would have needed assistance during that time, so it is a disability. The permanent one shows up in 2 Corinthians. He confesses to this church that he has a long-standing relationship with, that he has this thorn in the flesh, and that he asked God 3 times to heal him of it, and God refused and said, "My grace is sufficient for you." And so Paul has to kind of come to grips with that and wrestle with what this means for him. And you can see that in some of his writings. I think you see that particularly in his discussion of spiritual gifts in 1 Corinthians in the 12th chapter, and that's where I'm going to lose the exact wording on it. But he's doing all of this, that, the hand cannot say to the foot, "I have no need of you." The head cannot say to the foot. The hand cannot say to I don't remember what the other part is. But it's these parts talking to each other and saying, we can't really say one is more necessary than the other. And that is what Paul says is, I've lost the wording. And I'm looking at you. Why am I looking at you? It's the lifting up of the inferior members that Paul says, we give the inferior members, the members that seem the weakest, are actually indispensable. And that's the part that he's trying to highlight. And I think that's him kind of wrestling with, people see me as weak when they look at me, but there's no inequality here. We're all part of the same body. And when one suffers, everybody suffers. So that's one piece. And I also want to talk about, there were 2 church experiences. One of them with the church in Corinth, that evidently after Paul had left them, there were these other teachers that came in, and it's not really clear if it's the membership itself or if it's the other teachers that start kind of denigrating Paul's leadership and saying, look, when he's here with you, he doesn't seem really strong. He writes these really powerful letters, but when he comes here, I think what it says is his bodily appearance is weak and his speech is contemptible. So it's lifting up, it's saying we don't see much in this man. When he's in our presence, he doesn't seem like much. In contrast to that, there's a piece in Galatians that talks about that Paul had visited them in the past, and Paul is praising them for their hospitality and saying, even though he evidently had some sort of episode while he was in their presence, and he said, you did not spurn me, you did not throw me out, you treated me as an angel of God. So there's this real imbalance between the experiences that he had with these 2 congregations. And I will say that is very much true of people who live with disabilities. Sometimes you get people who are absolutely hospitable to you and welcoming and treat you like anybody else, and then some other congregations just are really not able to. I don't think it's that they're not willing. I think it's that they're not able to kind of figure out how to navigate making somebody feel welcome if they don't really fit into the norms of everything that happens in the space. So that's what I want to say about Paul. So again, this is probably not the image that you would have had in your head if I had said, let's talk about Jesus. And I'll admit that even after I've done 10 years of ministry and all of this Bible study, if somebody says Jesus to me, I still see that picture that was on the wall in my, I don't know, third grade Sunday school room or whatever. But Jesus is not blue-eyed and light-skinned. This is more representative of what he would have looked like. Jesus also does not escape the world without scars. So let's talk about the disabling event, which is, of course, the crucifixion. I remember when I was in the Shenandoah Valley, the church that I was serving didn't really want to do a Good Friday service. They didn't have any experience with it. I don't think they felt like it was necessary. We didn't do Maundy, Thursday either, so we went from Palm Sunday to Easter Sunday, and I kind of started doing like Keith did. I snuck in the Passion Story because we're not going to escape this. You can't just bypass this event entirely. But while they were, when they were being this stubborn about not doing Good Friday, I had heard that there was another Good Friday service in the community, and so some of the members and I went to that, and you went to that as well. It was an AME congregation in the community, and I have my own expectations of what Good Friday looks like, and instead of having that, we got a 15-minute plus meditation on exactly what would have happened to Jesus's body during the crucifixion. Wow. And I have promised myself for years and years and years that I would not inflict that on any other congregation. So I'm not doing that tonight, but we need to be able to all agree that a person hung on a cross with just their hands and no real support for keeping their weight, for being able to stand on anything, would have done severe damage, and it would have been disabling. So I think we can all agree on that. And since we believe in Jesus being fully human, we kind of have to wrestle with that piece of it. But we also believe that Jesus is fully divine, which means that we can shift the locus of our attention to his resurrected body. And we get a bunch of accounts of resurrection appearances, each of which I think gives us a glimpse of something that we can know eternally about Christ. So the road to Emmaus is that we know Christ through the opening of scriptures and the breaking of bread and the sharing of meals. Mary Magdalene at the tomb, we learn Jesus knows our name. So there's this continual identity of having somebody call our name and knowing that Christ is in that experience. The one that I want us to look at is the upper room resurrection appearances, because this is when Jesus appears still with the scars of resurrection. And that's kind of where we lose the plot a little bit, I think, because I don't think I said it at the beginning, but I had it as my opening piece, that when we're talking about the disabled, it's okay that we don't know these whole in-flesh stories, these long narratives about these people that Jesus meets and heals, because these are the Gospels, and the Gospel is about Jesus, so we follow Jesus, right? We're supposed to be paying attention to Jesus. But what I think happens at this resurrection appearance is that we get distracted, and we don't want to look at Jesus with the scars and the wounds. We want to pay attention to Thomas, right? Because Thomas is messed up. Thomas is not being very faithful. So let's look over here and let's just say this story is about doubting Thomas. But it's not about doubting Thomas. It's always about what we can learn of Jesus in that moment. And I think what happens with Jesus in that moment is that he is erasing the stigma that's been around people who are broken in some way. He comes to the disciples and he says, and I think it's the only resurrection account, and somebody can correct me later, I think it's the only resurrection account where Jesus actually says, look at me, touch me where I've been wounded. And he does that in his ministry too. Jesus goes to people and touches them even though they've been labeled as unclean. He touches them. He asks them to touch him. But this is the only resurrection account we have where it's the same thing. And I do think that he is negating this thought that there is an uncleanliness or sinfulness that's connected with brokenness. And so he is standing more in solidarity with people who are, imperfect. All of us are imperfect, but I think it extends beyond that and becomes an opening to say Jesus is also standing in solidarity with people who have disabilities and who have been labeled as imperfect, that we are all in solidarity with Jesus. So where do we go from here, and why does this matter? First thing I want to say is that these are all of the things that I've talked about are common disability experiences. And I had a list of all of these, and I'm not going to be able to remember, but being able to wrestle with who you are and kind of wrestling with who you used to be at the same time. For people who become disabled, there's that trying to figure out who am I now. There's feeling like you're not quite good enough or normal enough to be useful or influential, hired or called. Having these experiences in the church where people don't really understand what to do with you in the space. And then with Jesus, I think it's this idea of wanting people to see you as whole, even though you have imperfections, wanting to be seen, and people instead looking in another direction, overlooking you or ignoring you. And so that to me is the top reason why this is important. And what's important about that is that there's all of these people out there who have had these experiences, and they're not just out there with those people, they're actually in the pages of our Bible, and we haven't been talking about them. We have kind of overlooked them. We have looked in another direction or focused on a different part of the story. And I actually think, and maybe I'm a little naive about this, but I actually think if we had been lifting up these four individuals as in this fuller way, that maybe things would be different in our churches already. Maybe we would already be more inclusive and more accessible, because it would be unheard of to think that somebody with a disability, when we've tied them to these individuals, it would be unheard of for us to say, we're not going to build our facilities or structure our practices or do our worship service in a way that excludes them, because they are indispensable. They are part of us. So this is all of the reasons that I think this is important. we haven't done what I've said. We haven't focused on this portion of these people's lives. We haven't done all of the work that we need to do to be accessible, but that doesn't mean that it's too late. And so next week, if y'all can come here, and hopefully we'll get it recorded as well, I'll be talking about more how we can start working on improving accessibility for our congregations and for this congregation and any other place that wants to welcome folks. And I hope you will come and see us next week.